Welcome to the third session of Centering Indigenous Pedagogies in Mathematics Education. This year's three-part series is focusing on assessment.
Welcome, everyone. We are just so happy to be here with you today. As Janice was saying, just a little bit as folks are coming in, this is a series. This is the third in our series called Centering Indigenous Pedagogies in Math Education. First, I'd like to acknowledge that UBC is located on the unceded territory, the traditional unceded lands of the Musqueam peoples and the Tsleil-Waututh, and are also share the lands. We understand that, are in partnership between nations. The lands of UBC were used by many nations for many reasons. And we are grateful not only to be on this land, but to be working in partnership with the local nations, as we understand that as a practice of reconciliation and respect for the generations of stewardship between the nations and the land, because land, culture, and people are not separate. There's our partners. I knew they were coming. We are so grateful to be partnering. This is our third year, Cynthia and Janice and Joanne. This is our third year of this series. So we've been so grateful to partner with the Indigenous Math Network, the David Robitaille International STEM Education Network, Dogwood 25. And we would like to acknowledge funding and support from the Ministry of Education for this series, and the support and the guidance of the Rural Education Advisory.
Thank you, Leighton. It's good to be here. Welcome, everybody. My name is Cynthia Nicol, and I'm a professor in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy at UBC. And I'm also a member of the Indigenous Math Education Network that is helping to co-facilitate the session today on the traditional unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam people on this beautiful spring day. It's my pleasure to participate in co-hosting, and the session that we have today is called Centering Indigenous Pedagogies and Perspectives with a Focus on Assessment. So we'd like you to introduce yourselves and the lands that you're currently on. If you haven't already, please do that in the chat. And let me start by introducing to you Cuggan supernatural shapeshifter. And for those of you who have attended our previous webinars, Cuggan is familiar to you. But for those who are new to the series, let me introduce her. So here on the left here, you can see Cuggan as designed by Haida artist Billy Ivanovich. And Cuggan is a supernatural shapeshifter and is always around. Billy says that Cuggan sneaks up on you, kind of like math does, always kind of on the outskirts, ready to lend a hand or help you solve a problem, always there and always helping. A beautiful way of thinking about mathematics and thinking about mathematical flourishing. So here's Cuggan, and I'd also like to introduce my colleagues who are co-hosting and facilitating the session with me. So Joanne Archibald Kwam from UBC, University of British Columbia, and Dogwood 25. Joanne Jovanovic from Haida District Principal of Indigenous Education. Janice Novakowski, who is from the Richmond School District. She's a teacher consultant in math and numeracy, and also a doctoral student at UBC. Josh Essery from Yalis, BC. Josh is a grade 6-7 teacher at Yalis. And Monica Bergeron is from School District number 73 in the Thompson-Okanagan region. She is a high school math and science teacher. Stephanie LaFrance is a UBC doctoral student and also a high school math teacher, currently working on her doctoral dissertation focused on assessment. And Stephanie is coming to us from Edmonton. And Leighton Schnellert, my colleague, who we've already met, in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy at UBC. And Leighton is a specialist in many things, but also a specialist and expert in rural education. So here I just put, I made a map, Google Earth map, and I've put everybody's location on that map in different colors. Maybe this will be a little quiz. You can try to guess from which of the areas I just mentioned, although I just realized I introduced Stephanie from UBC, and she's also from Edmonton. So you can guess which color is which city from what I've just mentioned to our guests. And I'll just give you a second to do that if you'd like to. And I'll just start with the red one, obviously. The red one is Vancouver, where most of my colleagues and I are currently located. The purple, it's not purple, that's a blue turquoise dot is actually the Thompson Kamloops area where Monica is currently in. The orange dot is Edmonton, where Stephanie is. And the yellow is where Josh is and Yalis in the northern tip of Vancouver Island. And up in Haida Gwaii, we have Joanne Jovanovic. I'd like to just start by saying a little bit about the series and where we are in the series. Our guiding question for the series continues to be centering Indigenous pedagogies in math education. And last year we did 4 different sessions on this topic. One starting with becoming Indigenous Storywork ready, another on learning through land and place, a third thinking about mathematics in culturally responsive contexts, and then a fourth on looking at oral and experiential stories for mathematical flourishing. So all of those were our sessions last year, and we're continuing this year's session, building on these ideas for what we can do thinking about assessment. But the year before that, we also did a whole webinar series on culturally responsive math assessment. So the series we currently have is also extending this series 2 years ago, culturally responsive math assessment. Here is a beautiful image of the kelp in the seawater with Ku, which is a sea otter diving below, designed by Corey Savard of Haida Gwaii. So our current series extends our thinking where we're drawing upon teachings of Earth for assessment practices. So thinking about how can Indigenous pedagogies and perspectives guide us as teachers in our math education assessment practices. So take as an example an Indigenous pedagogy of embracing Earth as teacher, with the thinking that everything is connected to everything else. So how can we learn from human and more than humans in thinking about our math assessment practices? What can we learn about assessment and thinking about the Earth as teacher? And then, think about another example is an Indigenous Storywork, where the principles that guide our work with Indigenous stories being oral or written or experiential, or even carved in poles and danced in masks. How can the principles of Indigenous Storywork guide our assessment practices? So those are some of the questions that we've been thinking about related to that, starting our series. And it's kind of been guiding our discussions over the last 2 series and into this 3rd series. So we know assessment is a complex practice. It's one of the most difficult practices that we engage in as teachers, and I certainly know that. And I find that it's one of the most challenging things I do as a teacher, because how we assess can change our relationship that we have with the students in our classes and even their families. And it can, at the same time, provide really valuable feedback to improve our teaching practice in terms of, what question I should ask next to better understand what mathematical ideas my student is sharing. So the intertwining of teaching and pedagogy is almost inseparable. But if I think about the kinds of questions I might ask as an assessment of what decisions I need to make as a teacher, it could provide really valuable feedback to my students about what their strengths are and provide areas for further work. And it can provide me as a teacher information about what I can do next to better support my students in their learning. So at the same time, though, assessment can do a lot of damage. And we know that from our own experiences of thinking about assessment, maybe as a student, and maybe our own actions as teachers, the damage it can do for some in affecting their own mathematical identities and their confidence and how they see themselves as doers of mathematics. So a question is, how can we elevate this lasting impact on students of being, confident, as mathematician Francis Su would say, confident mathematical explorers, so that they have strong beliefs in themselves as mathematical doers and have this confidence and relationship with mathematics that will last them a lifetime. So in our last session, we introduced 3 perspectives that we are hoping to explore further in today's session, bringing together Indigenous pedagogies, perspectives, and mathematical flourishing through these 3 overlapping perspectives of thinking about assessment as an ecosystem, which emphasizes the connected nature of assessment practices to many other aspects of teaching and learning and school systems and policies. Thinking about assessment as ecosystems really emphasizes the opportunities that we can go to and think about land and place as teacher, as I previously mentioned, and consider, what can we learn from the human and more than human relatives in terms of providing feedback to our students and to us as teachers. So in that last session, we introduced Ku, which in Haida means sea otter, and we talked a little bit about the relationship of the sea otter to the kelp and the sea urchins and the delicate balance around that. And thinking about assessment as an ecosystem in that sense. We also spoke about assessment as Indigenous Storywork, which emphasized the principles of Indigenous Storywork to inform our assessment practices. And in session 2, the webinar on session 2, we talked about the principles of interrelatedness and synergy and holism, those that are on the left there. And in this session today, Joanne Archibald will bring the remaining 4 principles into conversation for us. And then the third perspective we took up through this series is assessment as pedagogy. And so thinking about emphasizing the pedagogical opportunities and openings that arise with assessment, including Indigenous pedagogies like experiential learning, as you can see here in the image with kids out on the beach. So you'll see elements of one inside another. It's more kind of pulling one to the foreground to study it a bit and leaving others to the background, but they're more intertwined than they are separate. But we're just going to pull them apart for a little bit, like a braided woven cedar basket. We're just going to pull at the weaving a little bit to get a better understanding of each of those. And we'll start with a project by Josh Essery. And he'll share a little bit about this project that he developed. And then we can talk a little bit about assessment practices through using his project as an example. So Josh teaches grades 6 and 7 in Yalis in BC, which you remember from the map is in the northern part of Vancouver Island. And this is Josh's 8th year of teaching, and he's spent most of the time teaching in Yalis. It's on the unceded ancestral territories of the Kwakwaka'wakw territory. So after Josh will share his project, we'll ask some of our team members to pose some questions for discussion, and you are certainly welcome to add your questions to the chat. One of the people that will be asking some questions that we've invited is Monica Bergeron, and as I introduced Monica a bit earlier, I'd maybe just say a few more words about Monica. Monica is the district numeracy coordinator for School District 73 on the Tk'emlúps Secwépemc territory, situated in the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwépemc Nation. And she has over 20 years of teaching experience in the middle and high school math and science. And right now is working on a project with Joanne and I, where she's mentoring teachers to bring Indigenous knowledge and ways of being into the classroom. So we'll have Monica and some other members of our team be able to engage in some conversation with Josh on his project related to assessment. Okay, over to you, Josh.
As I said, my name is Josh Essery. I'm zooming in from the unceded territory of the Kwakwaka'wakw, specifically the Numgais First Nation in Yalis, which is on Cormorant Island, known as Alert Bay. I've been teaching here for just north of 6 years, the grade 6-7 class, and it's been really fun, exciting. It's embedded. It has taught me quite a bit about the importance of math, and then trying to relay mathematics to students that may otherwise be super uninterested, especially in the middle school level. You're dealing with things like fractions and percents, things that are new concepts, and there are plenty of old jokes about fractions again type kind of thing. So to try and make it interesting, a journey began for me a couple of years ago when the students were trying to work out how to act out one of their legends. The legend is Big Figure, known as Zunaqua, who's a supernatural character. As we were trying to figure out how to act out this legend, the question arose, how big is Big Figure? So we decided to try and figure that out mathematically. The book on the right there is the Kwakiutl Legends. It's available through any bookstore. It has a collection of legends that have been published. And to the left is a map of the 18 different dialects of Kwakwala and the Kwakwaka'wakw territory, encompassing northern Vancouver Island and a portion of the Sunshine Coast. So this portion of the yellow that goes down the middle is the Numgais territory, which includes the entire Numgais Lake watershed. So it is a large piece of territory. Zunaqua herself, Zunaqua lives in the forest, but also as a supernatural being lives in the spirit world. So she can transition between these two places. These images here are within the Numgais Big House here in Alert Bay. So they're making glubuk, which is the barbecued salmon against the fire. One of my students here is Guachwina, or raven. And then we have Makwinuk here at the top, which is killer whale. So they're practicing during a cultural celebration. Here we hold at the end of the school in the Gyuksi, or the Big House. So the question was posed by one of my students, just sort of like an off the cuff question: how big is Big Figure or Zunaqua? I wanted to see if we could approach this through a mathematical lens, which caused me to do a deep dive into the relevant information and resources that we have. I first started off by studying the legends that are available within the book, and then others that are available that have been published online. One version of that legend suggested Zunaqua at once took 20 children from the forest edge. They were spending too much time close to the forest at sunset. And this was always served as the theme, or the moral of the legend is: don't hang out close to the forest edge at night, or Zunaqua will come and snatch you, will come and take you. Just for a little bit of background information, this is a carving of Zunaqua. She stands at the Umista Museum here in Elise. Was constructed in 1979 for the repatriation of the masks and regalia, which were taken through the potlatch ban. So in order to get these items back, the federal government told the Numgais they needed to build a museum to house them. So this is the museum that they have built. It's open daily. Please come up and come and see it. There's a virtual tour as well. Absolutely.
Zunaqua, the wild woman of the woods. I have a legend of Zunaqua, which goes, it was told to me by one of my elders, is that when children were bad, they would always tell the children that the Zunaqua was coming to get them. And the Zunaqua within dances, you see many dances where Zunaqua dance with a basket on their back. And she would go down to the village and pick up the children and throw them in the basket. She'll bring them off to the mountain, and if they're bad, she'd eat them. And the Zunaqua was the wild woman of the woods, and her means of food was children. So this was one of the stories always told to the children so that they would behave.
So through the examination of the literature, we found, as I said, one version of the legend that she took 20 children at once. By analyzing the dance, we can see how she would have worn the basket that she's taken the children in. So there are certain assumptions that we can make based on not only the written legend, but also the dance that is performed involving Zunaqua. We can I've also taken my students down to the Ashley, the forest, where she is supposed to come out from. So we can take a look at the topography as well as the tree placement, which further speaks to how the basket could be worn. All of this information can be collected and then analyzed through a mathematical lens, so we can make these certain assumptions, and we can start to approach this problem from a mathematical perspective. I've taken my students up to measure the kindergarten students to see what their length, width, and height are, and then use those data to multiply into basically how much volume 20 children would take or would make. We've gone down to the Umista Museum to take a look at the basket itself. Traditional construction of the Kwakwak woven basket suggests that it's rectangular in shape. So we would know it needs to be square at the bottom and then up, which means that we are looking at a rectangular prism. So we need to translate the volume of the children, which can speak to how big the basket would need to be for her to wear it in a way. Then we can use body ratios to determine what her length of neck to her head would be, as the basket would stop at her shoulders in order to lift the children over her shoulder in this manner that we see in the dance. We also know from analyzing the topography that the basket can't really go below her knees, otherwise she wouldn't be able to walk around as well between the trees in the forest. So these basic assumptions allow us to approach how big she must be based on how big the basket must be in order to carry this amount of children. It's been quite a journey going through it, but it was created out of a holistic interest of my students and trying to figure out how to do this in a way that approach. Through further research, I found that I was sort of accidentally doing story work. So the story work itself has allowed me to clean up what would otherwise be sort of a messy, holistic approach to mathematics. Next slide, please. So this is the basic layout of Storywork, which is connected to place. A place is incredibly important. It's where everything, well, takes place. Where Zunaqua is, where the students are, they're already familiar with the legend, they're already familiar with the dance. Now they get to see it through a whole different perspective. And it also makes mathematics relevant to where they live and the stories that they've already grown up with. Action is connected to math. So we're not just sitting in a room doing low-level clerical work for an hour. Jobs like that don't exist. This allows to take mathematics outside for them to experience, and in an inquiry method are able to not only encounter the problem that needs to be resolved, but learn how to solve that problem when they need to solve it. That helps create the necessity for them to understand the need to know this, and makes it not only relevant, but that information stays with them because it's now in context. It's in the appropriate schema for them to be able to use it. This, as it's a group inquiry project, also builds relationships, not only between myself and the students as we're experiencing this together, but also they're able to teach me things that I didn't know. For example, it makes it more complicated to realize that we can't actually answer this question because Zunaqua is a shapeshifter. She can be as big or small as she wants to be. But we can assert that she must be able to be at least this big in order to do this recorded in the story. So that's a great reveal at the end. As I've taught this to other classes, we can't answer that. But a lot of math inquiry, there are either multiple answers or you do a little bit of work and you let the next person carry it on. There is no necessarily end to it. Whereas we see in regular math lessons, you have the problem, you solve it, and you sort of move on, but you have your final answer. Mathematics as a vocation really isn't as clean cut as that. So this allows us to realize that math is messy. Math doesn't always yield an answer, but going through this process, using Storywork, using the text, the recordings, the animation, it brings all of their lived experience in not only into the classroom, but into the math classroom. It doesn't set it apart as it traditionally has been. Math as a class, as a subject in school, has often been seen as a sort of an ivory tower perspective. Oh, this is math, it's separate from everything else. There are ways to make it contextually valid, but this brings in everything that they have done in the past through elementary school and brings it through a mathematical lens. This is a mask. This is one of Joanne's masks here of Zunaqua, so it's absolutely fantastic. She's often depicted with big lips, a big nose, and then messy hair. There's often pitch in her eyes, so she's often rubbing her eyes like this. So the character of Zunaqua is not exclusive to the Kwakwaka'wakw. It's all over the central, northern, and southern coast of British Columbia. She's often been connected to Sasquatch. There's been connections made there, but it's been a lot of fun exploring math with Zunaqua. And this would be the part where I'd like to share a document here. So using the Storywork setup, I've created my unit. We could all see a document here. So I started out with making a unit plan. So there was some intentionality during this math exploration. I didn't want it to limit their involvement and their contributions to it during their inquiry, but I also wanted to make sure that it was aligned to the BC mathematics curriculum. So they weren't necessarily losing out on some learning there. So I've connected the curricular competencies. And let's see here. The content. So this is the usual stuff that a teacher would create for a unit, for a series of lessons. But what I've done here is I've used the template or the framework that was created for the Haida Gwaii involving Dr. Nicol and Joanne Archibald to try and create some intentionality using legends, using traditional knowledge and bringing it into the classroom as it pertains to mathematics. I didn't really have a framework here that was specific for the Kwakwaka'wakw. And it concerned me because I was able to create these types of lessons, but it was haphazard. It felt uncoordinated. So I examined the ability to see if I could translate this framework that was created for the Haida. Could I make it relevant to the Kwakwaka'wakw by using their traditional knowledge, their legends, their dances, their place? Is it adaptable? And that was the question that I spent a great deal of time examining. So I applied the principles of the framework, which goes by the acronym PAIRS, for each one of those words that we saw on the previous slide, and I included data to align it with that framework. I've written the additions here in red onto my unit plan. So there's intentionality to begin relationships right on the first lesson, because without relationships with the students, it degrades the ability to not only authentically engage with it, but it also has that sort of teacher-student dichotomy, which inquiry should be a team effort. We should be traveling together. Making sure that place is connected with it, with intentionality. We already know that the students are already familiar with the place. They're already familiar with the legend. They're already familiar with the dance and the song, but making sure that the place is connected also with mathematics. Is there enough data? Can we answer these questions? Have you thought about these questions? What do you think? So being able to engage with them in a mathematical level about something that they already know really well. Having enough time for the story work. They already know these legends, they already know these dances, they perform these dances in the Gypsy, but being able to start approaching them in a mathematical lens with intentionality. It also gives them the personal and collective agency. They can do this. They're doing it in a context from the familiar into the unknown. But with that blanket of familiarity, they're able to approach it. They want to do the math. And that was the end result. They were excited about coming to math. They went up and if they didn't know something, they didn't hesitate in asking. They asked each other. It was a very wonderful team effort. So including the framework, I have found that the framework itself is adaptable to other language groups. It wasn't exclusive to the Haida. And that's what I've found as a hindrance, as a curtailment for teachers to create these types of Indigenous resources. A, they don't know exactly who to ask. B, they don't necessarily feel prepared to address these. And they don't feel adequate in their own knowledge. But this framework gives teachers a familiarity with how to construct the unit and being able to connect the very important pieces that makes it culturally rich. So my end goal is to create more lessons like this to see if I can encompass all of the grade 6, 7 math curriculum as it pertains to BC. So instead of working out of a textbook, we now basically it's a natural extension of the cultural school that we already teach in. So math is no longer set aside, it's no longer set apart, it's now immersed and culturally relevant to them. So it's been a lot of fun. I hope to keep folks updated on this journey as I go through it. I have another lesson that my students make their own button blankets, so their own blanket and apron and headdress. I've contributed the mathematics in that as well, so we can have those conversations while they're creating it. And again, it's just in time learning. They need to figure out how to apply these crests. So the mathematics is part of that lesson intentionally to bring it into a cultural context for them. So it's growing, it's getting better. And as with all things, the first time you kind of teach something, it's jagged, it's mildly uncomfortable. Sometimes it falls flat, but it's been great because the students, I have their buy-in. And if you have a middle school class buy-in in math, you're winning. So thank you very much for your time. I'd be happy
Thank
to
you.
answer any questions that I can.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Josh. Thank you for sharing how you were using story to inspire students, and also story that they were familiar with in their community. And then thinking about that connection to place and mathematics, and building this lesson as an example for how we can think about assessment and pedagogy and Indigenous story work. So you didn't speak explicitly about assessment, because I think assessment is part of your pedagogy. It's so as we're talking about it, so intertwined, I'm thinking about that ecosystem. So maybe we can call upon some of the rest of the team who might be able to ask a question or two of you to kind of talk a little bit about, or what they noticed a bit about thinking about assessment and in the story of Zunukwa, and how students were engaged in this activity, and what you might think about as a teacher and assessment. So maybe I could pass it to maybe Janice first, and then perhaps Monica. Janice?
So thank you for sharing, Josh. One of the things that resonated with me was a story. The story of Zunukwa would appeal to so many different grades and ages of students. It's a community story, it's a cultural story. And it made me think about how you were focused on grade 6 and 7 concepts of ratio and data analysis and measurement, volume, but that I saw so many primary math concepts in that as well, that students at a younger age could explore those ideas. So I'm thinking about assessment and the range of learners that you likely have in your class. How does a story or the openness of those math concepts and investigations allow for you to assess students where they are in their learning?
Well, that's the greatest thing about inquiry, is because it's a story, you encounter the problem. The problem isn't presented to you, you find it. And you ask yourself, well, what do I do now? It's no longer siloed. You're not sitting there looking at an equation with a pencil. You now get to discuss it. It's open, it's free, which removes the stigma of not knowing. Because we're working as a guide, as a facilitator, as opposed to the traditional teacher up on the chalkboard, you're not necessarily going to give them a test. But what you can do is watch in real time the level of their understanding as they encounter the problem, see what they already know, and then you can build directly from that. So it's very individualistic in that way. You're not trying to show, 18 students one way of doing that, the way that you understand it. You get to see where they are. You can guide, you can give hints, or you can go through the problem with them, but it's always from where they're standing. It's not necessarily from where you are standing, because they have just stumbled upon the problem. They need to answer it. They need to respond to it. So assessment comes from the relationship perspective. You already know your students. You've built this relationship over time. Hopefully it's one of trust, and you're able to discuss what they understand in a very real and connected way. That would be the ideal, but it's very experiential in that method of assessment. So there are things that we do need to write down. For example, the measurements when we're measuring the little kids. They need to write that down. They would need to write down the ratio. So there are artifacts at the end of this that you could traditionally mark, but it's the growth that you see when you're having these mathematical discussions, these inferences. Watching them be able to make mathematical inferences themselves. A lot of it is experiential, a lot of it is observational. It's like, I know that you can do it because I saw you do it. Whether they're able to do that in all contexts, but you have that in traditional assessment methods anyway. Like they can do this today. I don't know if they can do it tomorrow, but we'll find out. The more that they do it, though, the more experience they have, and the better recall they have because they've encountered it. It's now in context as opposed to being siloed in that traditional method of how we perceive math in school.
Thank you, Josh. I'll turn it over to Monica, maybe for another question.
Sure. I'm going to have to be the voice from the abyss today because I don't think you can see my face. We have some technical issues going on here. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, that's all right. I didn't do a great job of my hair anyways, so I can spare you all. It's funny, Janice, when you looked at it from a primary perspective, because my immediate thought was thinking about grade 9, and I was thinking about scale factor and all those other pieces. So I was going the other direction, right? Maybe from being a secondary teacher all those years. But I was also thinking about always keeping in mind that triangulation of assessment and getting not just the product. And it seems like you're doing a great job of getting the kids to infer and really look at the problem and get right into the actual place-based learning, which I think is fantastic. But maybe having, maybe recording some of those conversations and getting kids to also have like a variety of stop points for student reflection times, because that's when we can really, really see some of those cross-curricular numeracy learning progressions. They just kind of naturally will come out when kids will reflect on the reasonableness of their solution and things like that. So those were the two things that kind of stuck out to me, like connecting maybe with the older kids and getting them to like look at the grade 6 work, and then the grade 6 is kind of connecting with the younger ones like Janice is mentioning, but then also those stop points for student reflection, and then thinking, how can I get assessment information through observation and conversation as well, all the way along.
That's a very valuable point. Thank you very much.
You betcha.
Thank you, Monica. Good. Well, thank you very much, Josh, for sharing. And we're going to go now into thinking about the Indigenous Storywork principles. And I hope that you'll be able to say a few more and offer maybe some more suggestions and ideas and your thoughts related to the story and your project and the Indigenous Storywork principles. So thank you once again, Josh.
Thank you.
For giving us so much to think about and talk about. Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen again and ask Joanne Archibald, Hong Kong William, if she will share a little bit more about the 4 principles of 4 R's, as last time we spoke about in our last session, holism, interrelatedness, and synergy. So now we'll talk about responsibility, respect, reciprocity, and reverence. Joanne.
Great. Oh, ASYL, everyone. Yes, you call us hi to Cynthia and to Josh for starting us off in this fabulous way today. I'm joining you from the traditional unceded lands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. In the Stalo area, that's I'm a citizen, a member of Stalo Nation. We have the story of Thokoya, which is like Zunaqua. So yes, there's a lot of similarities as far as what was presented today. In the Stalo story, there are children involved, and it's the children who figured out a way to get released, to escape from Thokoya. And poor Thokoya while a shapeshifter, in a way, she shaped into all kinds of little creatures. And that's all I'm going to say, because you might want to look up that story. The Stalo elders called it the mosquito story, but it is about Thokoya, who is very much like the Zunaqua character. And and of course, the two characters carry a big basket. So I also use a basket thinking about story work and how we can, a particular type of basket we call the sito, which can store our treasures. And I think of our traditional and life experience stories as treasures that could be in a type of a sito, a treasure basket. So if we go to the next slide, please. With the principles, and those who want to know more about these principles, you can look at the website that I've created with a few videos about the 7 principles. You can learn more, and you can also look at the very first session of our webinar series of this 2024-25 series, and in that one, I do, as Cynthia mentioned, share ideas about holism, interrelatedness, and synergy, as they could relate to pedagogy and more. And also I say, I hint at those 4R principles in that first session. But today I'm going to speak a little bit more about these 4Rs and thinking about getting ourselves story work ready. That's as in our role as a teacher, facilitator of learning, to get ourselves ready to work with Indigenous stories. And we'll also have a few questions that I'll ask some of our team members to share some of their thoughts that connect the question to one of the R's. So we'll go to the first R, please. And today I'll start out with reverence. And with these principles, they could be their own, like for thinking of the basket, a particular strip of cedar material, could be the cedar root, could be sometimes the bark of the cedar tree. But the strand itself has its own purpose in a basket, and has, as the weaver of the basket, we can create beautiful designs because some of the strands could have natural color to them. And so there is that connection, interrelatedness of the particular pieces of cedar to the basket itself. But if we want to kind of understand each principle, then we have to learn to work with each strand for the basket. So thinking about reverence, what has helped me share these thoughts with others is when I'm in nature, in the environment, or even just looking at where I am today, I can see the wonderful mountains, and I see the ocean far away. And I'm often awed, by nature. You go into nature and you sometimes just feel that wonderful presence, of the wind, the air, and to think of myself as a human being, a small creature, if you will, in this great big environment. And I am filled with awe, and I'm filled with wonder. I start to wonder about things. So I think reverence, having a feeling and a position of reverence, can help us be open then to honoring the cultural knowledge that the students will bring into the classroom. And so when I think about math assessment and the practice of math assessment, we could ask a question. how can I then honor students' ways of knowing and being? Or how can I be curious about and awed by students' mathematical thinking and doing? So if I am to get ready to do, to carry out, these questions, how do I get ready to do that? How do I get ready to be open so that I could experience awe and how a student might carry out um, a, a math um, task, or think about how the students will talk about the story. How do they talk about Zunaqua? And how do they figure out how big is Zunaqua? Just imagine you can put 20 kids in that basket. My goodness, how does that happen? Right? So that's the way how we might open ourselves to creativity, to more questions. So let's go to some questions in the next slide.
Before we do that, Joanne, you know what? It might be interesting for Josh to just share a response to that,
Okay.
in terms of thinking about how did the kids think about the basket and the size. I think you have a nice little story related to that, that really honors students' ways of knowing and doing as an example of thinking about awe. Would you like to share a little bit there, Josh, or?
The basket is it's an interesting perspective because we needed to first assert the shape of it, but also further questions for kind of manifest from it. If you have 20 kids in the basket would need to be tall enough that they couldn't climb out. So further questions arise in that, further like practical questions, and then taking the time to explore that because that's the direction they want to go. It's not necessarily part of the math lesson itself, and some teachers may be eager to get to the meat of the math in it, but exploring the reasoning, exploring the connections that they have to the question, but also the connections that they have to the story, can grow. So you can always steer the conversation where you want it to go, but give it time to gain momentum, to grow its own legs. And if you don't get to the math, that's okay. It's still going to come. But yeah, giving that time for the students to experience their own questions in that context absolutely is very valuable. So it really helps them gain that wonder, because that's what they're wondering. So give them the space to do that.
Yeah, and so being open yourself to and thinking about becoming in story work ready with reverence, to be open to allow yourself to let the curiosity of the students guide the lesson, so that you can have them be able to ask those questions and take it forward, rather than, as you said, being able to jump quickly into the meat of the mathematics problem, because you will get there with it. Yeah, thank you, Josh. And I just wanted to connect it to what was already shared. The question that we have next that Joanne was referring to in the next slide is from the audience, questions that we gathered related to assessment. And so this question was, how can we ensure differentiated assessments that are meaningful and relevant to our students? And thinking about that and in terms of reverence. So maybe that's a question that one of our team might be interested in responding to. Differentiated assessment that's meaningful and relevant, and how would I prepare myself as an instructor, thinking about the lens of reverence, to be open, to be curious and awed by my students' thinking. So Monica, would you like to jump in on that one?
Sure. I was reverence was always one of the hardest of the 4 R's to kind of really get kids to kind of understand. And I felt like when we did projects and we took them onto the land and we were just quiet for a moment, that's when we got the most conversation about that awe. So in terms of this project, I just kept writing a project idea down. And I think Josh mentioned that they do go out to the forest at the beginning, and just the size of that forest, because within that particular context, you can differentiate that assessment right there by saying, okay, so some kids might jump to the math of, okay, the forest is this large in comparison to how large I am, and they might just experience their awe by the sheer magnitude of that number in comparison. Other kids will go, what is the feeling that I felt? And so I think when we talk about being in place, it's not just about the land, it's also the emotion, the place of emotion. What emotion is that evoking in you? And so I think as educators, just we want to be like really cognizant of the fact that that assessment can mean something different for reverence. So for instance, like I said, some people can take a mathematical bent to it, and some kids, that's where their comfort zone is. And other kids might be like, I just felt super small in comparison, and they might just use comparative language. And I think that all of those are fine entry points and all valid entry points. And so again, that comes back to conversation, but I won't continue. You guys can jump from there.
Thank you, Monica. Should we go to the next one, Joanne?
So if we go to respect, I think that some of the principles like respect, sometimes, they can become like a cliche. We take them for granted that we know what they mean or that we do it. And so I was thinking here, well, for us as educators, then it's important for us to, in combining being open, to have a reverential feeling perspective, that we also have to create some openness to ourselves, openness of space. And often we need to make sure we have time to do this. And I know that this is something that's so precious today, that time, where there's so many demands on everybody's time. But often we have to, think about how can we practice some patience so that we can sometimes have silence, like Monica just mentioned, being out on the land, or being in even a space in the classroom where you tell a story and leave a bit of silence between some of the ideas, and that there's quietness there, and it gives individuals time to think, time to feel, time to be. So that's what I mean about sometimes we need to have some patience to create the space for inquiry, the space to listen, to really listen. I often say, I've heard the elders say we listen with our 3 ears. Of course, the 2 we hear with, but we bring that together with what's in our heart, to think about what's in our being. It could be like another ear too. That we certainly observe, but sometimes it's making sure there's enough time to watch, and it's thinking of students' body language, their facial expression. When a child gets an idea, you see the twinkle in their eye, or their smile comes to their face, or if they're really puzzled, there's there could be that expression. So really being able to know students, through their body language, the way they communicate, and also a way to experience. So we can use all our senses for doing, these activities, so that in our math assessment practice, we think about, while we encourage, we do the listening and observing that we're accustomed to doing, but we can go beyond or deeper where we give more time for these actions, or we use other senses. We listen to what students say, but we also listen and recognize emotions, perhaps, or see their actions, see what they create. And with that, think about how we respond to value what the child has taken a long time or a short time to create. We can value that. At the same time, we can try and extend the thinking to, give a little stretch, to what the student might think or do. So that's part of respect. So I think we can go to questions, and we'd also, invite Josh to add more to these questions here. So, how do we teach and assess in ways that support students working at their own pace, but at the same time keeps the class together?
Yeah, maybe we could ask Stephanie. Would you want to jump into that one? Stephanie is a high school teacher working on her PhD with a focus on assessment in math education. So,
yeah, and in thinking about assessment, and I want to bring in sort of the idea again of the ecosystem where diversity enables flourishing. And I think that does also apply to having a range of abilities in the classroom. And I as a teacher myself, I always worried, like, I don't want my students to fall behind. I want to make sure my students feel appropriately challenged in the mathematics. And so the assessment piece that differentiates is in the feedback and having a deep curiosity and, as Joanne said, reverence, a deep respect for students' thinking, and curating feedback that is unique to where that student is. And then creating a community environment where students can give each other feedback or reflect together and contribute to sort of the living knowledge of mathematics in the classroom. That's sort of where my mind goes.
great, thank you. Good. And how about Leighton? Would you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it really makes me think of responsive assessment. Really makes me think of how you're noticing where students are and moving them forward. And so in terms of pace, it's almost like each student's pace in a way. And so it's like, how are we nudging everybody forward? And so you can engage with kids when they're making sense of and coming up with their own ideas. Say, well, tell me more about that. Or where would you go next with that? And so I really like the idea that Josh opened up around like coming back and staying with it for a while in relationship. And so it's really about moving everybody forward. And sometimes, I was a math teacher too, Cynthia, you remember back in the day. And so I had this like feeling like everybody needs to get to here instead of like everybody needs to move forward from where they are. And so I just really like this kind of like staying with something over time in relationship, and how, we can actually be reverent towards the children in terms of like, oh, wow, so interesting, what next, and a little bit less about getting kids to look at each other and say, how am I doing in relationship to them?
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll move to the next slide, responsibility.
Great. Now with this one, I'm wanting today to focus more on, thinking about and recognizing how colonization has shaped our various perspectives about indigeneity and ways to develop various learning relationships with, could be Indigenous educators who work in the schools, with the school district, with various Indigenous organizations, and then of course the Indigenous students' families and communities. So that with the relationship, you know, I think that's so it's important for all students. I think with Indigenous students and families, you know, it's really, really necessary so that, you know, the families, family members can feel a sense of maybe comfort going to the school, talking to the teacher, you know, rather than feeling that they're afraid to, or that, you know, the school is quite separate from what they are accustomed to. And often, sometimes families won't know how a school or a teacher might think about Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And so that's why I feel it's important as educators to learn about the history, you know, the colonized history. And I think that so many people are, which is wonderful. And there are lots of resources out there, all kinds of multimedia resources that will help us understand the impact, the intergenerational impact, you know, of colonial laws and policies. And so when we take that kind of experience and knowing and embed it within our math assessment practice, then we might ask ourselves, you know, how can I communicate what I have learned about students' mathematical ways of knowing that contributes to strengthening relationships with them and their families? So we've already, with some of this discussion about reverence and respect, emphasize the relationship with the students. But this time, maybe we could think about how we can strengthen our relationships with members of the students' families, their extended families in particular, are members of the Indigenous communities, and how we might then emphasize, you know, the wonder, the awe, the positive way that Indigenous students are engaging in mathematics, so that the families will then have something very positive, that, and especially bringing it together with math, which often has not been positive for the students' experience. Then also thinking about not only developing but sustaining these relationships with Indigenous community members, family members, perhaps Indigenous colleagues, and to really talk about meaningful math assessments. I remember Cynthia and I talking with some of the Haida elders and talking about math. And when we did this many years ago, those elders were joyful about math. Math was an important part of their way of living. And they were quite sad to know that a lot of their students were not feeling good about math, right? So again, we can also think about, well, not only, of course, we start with the pedagogy, but bringing that together with how can we assess, and how do we know, how we could talk to elders to say, you know, how did your teacher, your ancestor who taught you to make baskets, you know, how did you know that you were, you know, achieving some bit of success, you know, and talking about that. And I think that will get us to maybe more cultural or meaningful assessments. So if we move to our questions then, you know, with this one, perhaps we would look at this one. How can assessments be designed to consider cultural backgrounds of students, creating a more culturally sensitive learning environment? So I think we've talked, you know, we had some already good ideas about this one through Josh's presentation, and from just what I said about this notion of responsibility. But let's see, maybe we could ask Monica, do you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. I actually had a lot of thoughts when you said that. I think that when we're building assessments for our projects and we reflect on the First Peoples principles of learning and how they connect, we want to consider the modality of the assessment as well as the actual assessment itself. So the way in which we deliver that. So did I give like space and time for the student to demonstrate their learning? Was there an opportunity for them to explore their own identity in relation to this project? So for instance, like did they have the opportunity to make a connection with their own life experience or their family traditions? The other thing I was thinking about is how rich it was that we invited our local cultural educator. She's our knowledge keeper here in Kamloops, and we invited her to do the opening prayer at our recent dinner series for our book club. And the things she brought in were absolutely amazing. And it took the discussion in such a rich way, like it just took it in a direction. So I think really leaning on those people. And if you don't know who those people are, knowing to go to your Indigenous departments in your schools and asking for a list of those people, the knowledge keepers and the elders that can somehow make that connection for us. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Great. Thanks, Monica. That enriches all the ideas that have been shared now, and to also important to know that there are knowledge keepers, cultural knowledge holders, elders, you know, that are connected to students, families, and communities that often, you know, are really keen to share what they know with others. So we'll go to the last R, and I think with this one, you know, we've actually been doing this in this session, this action of reciprocity, like sharing what we know or what we've learned with others to reinforce or extend that learning, and also recognizing that as individuals, we are both teachers and students all at the same time. And when we think of the students as our teachers, you know, I think that's a fun way to think about, and even to tell the kids, hey, today you're the teachers and I'm the learner. I wonder how I will learn from you, the teachers. Anyway, just thought of that idea. It would be a bit fun. So in our assessment practice, then, you know, we think about what are ways we share our experience and understanding so that there is mutual benefit. You know, we can do that, of course, face to face. We do it via the webinar like we're doing today. We do it through conferences, through sitting down with a cup of coffee or tea, and we can share at that point. But also think about how we can use this notion of reciprocity that relates especially to community and place. We've talked, of course, a lot about culture and math, but, you know, place is becoming and always has been very important. So by sharing ideas, we can deepen, you know, our understandings about place and also connecting it to community. So I think we won't do the questions because, you know, we're sort of, I think, getting running out of a bit of time here. But what we did, you know, was that in our very first webinar of this series, we asked those who participated to to share some of the pressing assessment issues that could be put in the form of a question. And we've drawn on that input throughout this whole webinar series because we felt those were such important questions and issues that we needed to be able to talk about them, share ideas, raise more questions throughout the whole series, the 3 sessions. And today kind of also we can come full circle, as has been said, and we, have been able to center, the our various pedagogies, and whether we might call them Indigenous pedagogies or pedagogies in Indigenous education or pedagogies for math assessment, that we're centering these pedagogies. We're centering students' learning, centering Indigenous students and their families, and students' families and communities. And also we're starting with ourselves, getting ourselves ready, that we could think of assessment as this ecosystem, as Indigenous story work, and as pedagogies. We started out with thinking about these particular frameworks. And as I mentioned in that piece, that strand of the cedar for making the basket, and these are their own distinct frameworks or approaches. But throughout this series, we've been able to see the distinctness. We've been able to see the interconnectedness among the 3 approaches. And I think where I felt maybe we might be, so that, this basket that I started with, well, what I said, sometimes our baskets can store, our tools, our treasures. So with this basket, I put in some treasures that could be from books that Indigenous people, have published, sharing their stories, sharing what they've learned. We're still connecting to place, to environment, respectfully and reverentially and responsibly, handling the material from the environment. The little talking stick is a way that we carry out the action of sharing, of doing, lifting up the basket, and we can take it with us to our next place where we'll sit, maybe have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, chat with each other, share what we've been learning, ask more questions, as we think about how we center our Indigenous pedagogies in math education. That could be for assessment, could be as an ecosystem, as Indigenous story work, more as pedagogy. So that's just a brief kind of recap of this series. And I think, Cynthia, you're going to continue on.
Great. Thank you very much, Joanne, for wrapping up with some wise comments that bring it all together at the end. Yeah, this wraps up our series on centering Indigenous pedagogies in math education with a focus on assessment. We encourage everybody to go to the website and look at the videos if you didn't have a chance to get the other ones, sessions 1 and 2. And we just encourage you to explore more about these ideas in your practice. I think Jennifer Bell has some great questions there that she has that I hope that you're able to continue further, Jennifer, and continue the conversation on how we might be able to think about aligning with the standards as well as creating evidence for assessment that is culturally responsive. How do we actually do that in alignment? I don't know if those are 2 necessarily separate things. I think we can do them both together, but it would be great to kind of continue that conversation further. And one way to do that is to attend the Indigenous Math Education Symposium, and that's coming up on May 13th and 20th. And on the 13th, we have Dr. Shandon Peet, who's going to be sharing some of his work on Indigenous astronomy and working with water as a life form. And in session 2, we will have sharing of projects where educators are talking about the things that they're trying in their classrooms. So you're welcome to join and to be a part of, you can present if you like, or you can just join and be a part of the discussion and contribute that way. But that's certainly available to you. And I think assessment is such a part of what we do as teachers, right? It's just really hard to think any differently than that. Any decision that we make is based on something to do with trying to figure out how can I learn more about what my student is thinking? How well am I actually teaching this lesson? So we're always making these little assessments all the time, but within that, there's lots of tensions. We're thinking about assessment related to valuing collaboration, but at the same time looking at at the success of the individual, of trying to contribute to the family and at the community and thriving, both of those at the same time, nurturing those trusting relationships at lots of different levels at the same time, and then trying to create those conditions of well-being that benefit human and more than human, that are of, as Joanne and I both said about the conditions of mathematics, of benefiting or being more harmful than beneficial. So trying to think about those conditions of well-being. So I hope that we've left you with something to think further about and to be able to sleep on and think about in your own classroom, and that eventually you'd like to share at the symposium. And I want to just thank all of our speakers who attended today, Monica and Josh from the classroom. Thank you very much. Joanne Ivanovich on Haida Gwaii, would you like to say a few words before we wrap up? And I think we also have a poll that's going to be coming, but Joanne, if you want to unmute and share something, you're welcome to do that.
Sure. How Cynthia? How
Thank
everyone for sharing the stories. And as I think about the Wild Woman of the Woods, I actually have a Wild Woman mask that I quite like. But when I thought about the basket, and we just did a little making cedar bracelets with grade 8s with one class. And so when I think about the basket that 20 kids could fit into, how much cedar was needed for that, and how was that woven, and who did that? And yeah, so certainly thought-provoking thoughts and the assessment piece is always it's a tough one, because everybody wants some kind of a real good firm answer on what's the best way to do that. And as a teacher, that becomes your issue, really. Others can contribute to it, but to contribute to some ideas on how to do that. But it really goes back to being able to be comfortable with your group to be able to do what you need to do. So, yeah. And I just wanted to finish with one little quote out of Richard Wagamy's book, because I just came back from a grade 12 PALS session and reminded of, how to get families into schools. And grade 12 parents often aren't very visible in the high school. They are for grad meetings or things like that. But so today we had a PALS session, and so students were asked to bring somebody from their family, and some brought a parent, some brought an auntie, some brought grandparents, and it was quite a rich time, but which reminded me of this, so I just want to quickly read this. Very short. It's out of the What Comes from the Spirit, page 134. We all have stories within us. Sometimes we hold them gingerly, sometimes desperately, sometimes as gently as an infant. It is only by sharing our stories, by being strong enough to take a risk, both in the telling and in the asking, that we make it possible to know, recognize, and understand each other. And that's a really powerful quote, I think, and it really speaks to all the work that we do with math work in our lives. So how
Well, thank you, Joanne. I like the holding the story gently in our hands. It's a beautiful way to think about that. So yeah, we hope that all of you have taken something that you can hold gently in your hands with you to your classroom. Thank you again to everybody. Here's a poll that we're asking you to complete. Take you 2 seconds to do. And we want to also thank the Edith Lando virtual learning site for supporting us with this webinar. And see you next year with our next series.